These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal Television for Agricultural Business Decisions is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, hi everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett, and thank you for spending some time with us today on Market Journal. We've got a great lineup for you as we're back from Denver, including more takeaways from last week's Commodity Classic, plus some practical tips to help you make the most of your water this growing season. Central Valley Ag's Luke Beckman, he is going to drop in to talk about what he's seeing in the grain markets. And of course, Eric Hunt, he'll have your weekly weather outlook. But first, we'll get a heads up on some important Farm Service Agency deadlines. With the passage of the American Relief Act, Farm Bill authorized programs have been extended for another year. This includes both the agriculture risk coverage and price loss coverage programs. Producers have a choice when it comes to coverage: ARC County or PLC for crop-by-crop protection, or ARC Individual to cover the entire farm. While changing your election for 2025 is optional, you still have to enroll each year with a signed contract.
You know, our main safety net for those producers in the upcoming season. The election and enrollment period for that is open now up until April 15th. So producers will take a look at the ag risk coverage and price loss coverage programs and decide which one they want to pick on a crop-by-crop basis for their farm. This is an annual process that we've had for a number of years now, so for most producers it'll probably be something they're familiar with. For producers who are looking for maybe more information about what they should select, ARC or PLC, we did do a webinar with the Center for Ag Profitability here at UNL, where Dr. Brad Lubin kind of took a look at those programs and did some analysis on what maybe some expectations are for the 2025 season. And so producers can take a look at that video that's linked on our Nebraska FSA website, as well as the Center for Ag Profitability website, to help them make that decision. And then come see us prior to that April 15th deadline. So for the election part, where you're choosing between ARC or PLC, if you don't make a new selection, what you had in 2024 will roll over into 2025. However, we do need a new signed contract, so that enrollment part we do need each year. So that for sure producers need to have done before that April 15th time period.
Also coming up at the end of March is a deadline for dairy margin coverage. This is a voluntary risk management program that offers protection to dairy producers when the difference between the all milk price and the average feed price falls below a certain dollar amount selected by the producer.
That program takes a look at the average price of milk and the average price of feed and the margin between the two, and producers can kind of apply for a level of assistance or safety net under that difference in margin. So the deadline for that, again, is March 31st for producers to get in and work with their FSA office to apply.
Along with these deadlines, FSA's farm loan staff is also working with producers right now to sign up direct and guaranteed loans for farm ownership and operations. These loans can help buy or expand family farms, improve operations, and even support land tenure, all with the goal to keep farms thriving for future generations.
You know, our farm loan staff is also busy working with producers on direct operating, direct ownership loans, as well as guaranteed operating and ownership loans. You know, a lot of customers are coming in, making decisions about what they need for inputs and looking at financing related to those inputs for the 2025 season. And so our offices are also busy there. So if you're a customer who needs to access financing, you can also talk to our county FSA offices about that as well.
Now, as you heard Bobby mention earlier, there are some online resources available. You can find a direct link to those webinars and other FSA resources, along with a story, over on the Market Journal homepage. Well, spring planting is hopefully just around the corner, and with another dry year possibly ahead, now might be a good time to be thinking about investing in ET gauges or soil water sensors. There's plenty of tools out there to help fine-tune your irrigation, saving water, energy, and most importantly, money. Market Journal's Bill Dodd in this week's Conservation Corner takes a closer look at how some of these tools can help make every drop count.
Water is one of the most important variables in the equation for crop producers. During a time when precipitation has been sparse around the state, when it comes to irrigated cropping operations, water use efficiency is becoming more and more of a necessity.
Specific things, you mentioned the drought, that's a big part of it. In some natural resources, it's really important to not only reduce the use of water for irrigation, but also reduce the consumptive use, and that's the crop water use in particular. In a lot of places, the level of nitrates is also a concern. So if we're overusing water for irrigation, we're much more likely to have excess water moving from the root zone down to the aquifer, and that often takes nitrates with it. So those are two of the big reasons. It does seem like droughts are getting more frequent than they used to, as well as large rainfall events, and so more and more the timing of the rain doesn't match what we would like it to be, and good water management helps us adapt to that as best we can.
An easy mistake for producers to make when it comes to irrigating their fields is simply over-irrigating. This could lead to excess water and energy consumption that will ultimately add to your input costs and could potentially help foster some crop diseases that feed on moisture.
One would be, it's really easy to put on extra water. It's kind of like a cheap insurance policy, and it takes some effort to really be thoughtful and apply the amount that the crop water needs. It's a lot easier to put on a little extra. However, in that case, we're using more water than necessary and more energy than necessary as well to continue putting water on. So a little bit of effort, sensor data is really helpful, or crop water use data, but being confident to make the decision that we need this water. I'm going to water it to avoid stress, but I'm not going to put on extra water.
While producers continue to count down the days until planting, now would be an opportune time to see if some water management tools could help you alleviate some of your water use during the 2025 growing season.
Soil water sensors are really helpful for irrigation scheduling, and I think over time they're becoming more useful, more reliable. Some of the changes are that now there are services where industry will install the sensor for you and provide data on the cloud, and so it's a lot easier than it used to be. And less likely to have problems with a poor installation, a lot easier to access the data remotely and make decisions remotely and control your irrigation remotely. Of course, there's some cost with that, but producers' time is really valuable, so those types of products have become really popular. In terms of potential savings, it'd be pretty realistic to expect you might reduce your irrigation by one revolution of the pivot to 3 revolutions of the pivot by having that soil water sensor data to give you more confidence on when to irrigate. From there, it's a question of the energy cost associated with when you do a revolution.
Beyond what can be done by producers in the here and now, researchers at the University of Nebraska are continuing to test new methods of water use efficiency to help producers continue to maximize yields and cut down on input costs during future growing seasons.
Some of the ongoing research that we're involved with, it would be variable rate irrigation. We have a VRI, variable rate irrigation field, up at the Eastern Nebraska Research Extension and Education Center. In fact, we did some of our early work there funded by the Corn Board and the Soybean Board together. We've done a lot of work with unmanned aircraft or drones, as well as satellites, to collect data on how the crop canopy is doing and using that data to inform our irrigation management. One of the exciting things that I've learned over the past few years is that satellite data has become much better than I expected it to. In fact, we're much less dependent on the drone data for our research. One of the things that the satellite data is most helpful for is to estimate the amount of crop water use. It keeps track of how that canopy is growing, which directly impacts the amount of water use. And I've noticed that multiple industry products now are more and more incorporating that satellite data into the services that they offer. Another area of research up at NREC is putting sensors specifically on the center pivot itself. And the sensors that I think have the most potential to be useful for irrigation on the pivot are infrared thermometers. So we mounted several of those infrared thermometers, and those thermometers tell us the temperature of the plant. And just like I get hot when I'm not drinking enough water, the plant canopy temperature rises when it's under water stress, and so we can detect that. So the strategy is in real time, as we're irrigating the field, to be assessing whether that canopy is under stress or close to stress, and to use that to inform our irrigation management. That's more difficult than using the satellite data that I talked about to estimate crop water use, so we still need some development on that, but that's one of the things that the industry is looking into, is mounting these sensors on the pivot and using that real time for data analysis.
While there are a number of ways producers can limit the amount of water and energy it takes to deliver water to their crops, the future of conservation and farming will continue to see new and innovative ways of conserving one of the most essential crop inputs. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
All right, thank you very much for that Conservation Corner segment, Bill. We appreciate that update. Well, it's now time, that part of the show where we like to turn our attention over to the markets. And joining us this week for an in-depth look at what's happening in the grain markets is Central Valley Ag's Luke Beckman. Luke, it's good to see you. Thank you very much for returning here on Market Journal. As you and I are visiting here on Wednesday afternoon, we continue a theme here for the corn and soybean complex, trending lower. What's your assessment of the current state of the markets?
I really feel it's a risk-off environment, Bryce, as we really deal with uncertainty. If you looked at where the market was, 3 weeks ago, as we got into late February, the market was really charged up. We had a lot of managed money involved and invested, particularly in the corn market, where we had reached levels we hadn't seen since the Russia invasion of Ukraine several years ago. That was the level of investment that we had seen into the corn market by managed money that really pushed old crop corn futures back over $5. Since that time, managed money has trimmed those positions by 37% as of March 4th, when the most recent data that we have available. So it's really been the uncertainty that has caused a lot of that investment money, those dollars, to come out of the corn market. We see managed money actually back into a negative position on the soybean market. So uncertainty is going to cause money to move to the sidelines, and it's really impacted our markets here in the last couple of weeks.
We did see a nice bump in prices, as you mentioned. Did you get a sense that a lot of producers are moving some of their old crop to free up some storage?
Absolutely. The farmer was a very active marketer here between January 1st and the end of February on that run-up, prices we hadn't seen really since last summer. So the producer did a very nice job of rewarding that rally. We saw cash values break pretty considerably. That's always a good indicator that the farmer is an active mover of grain and pushing grain into the pipeline. So felt like producers certainly took advantage. I think they've been very quiet the last 2 weeks as a result of that. They're in position now with having sales. They're just in execution mode right now, making deliveries against those sales and waiting for this market to recover before they re-engage.
Mm-hmm. As we came into this week, we were expecting a WASD to perhaps move the markets a little bit, but as the WASD came out on Tuesday, not a lot of change in that. As you took a look at those numbers from USDA, anything stick out to you?
Yeah, it was a copy and paste report, Bryce. We didn't see any changes to the domestic balance sheet on corn. Soybeans, we saw a reduction in seed use, bumped higher and offset by residual use. So no change to the carryouts for corn or soybeans. In the soybeans, that was largely expected. Corn, a little disappointing that we didn't see a bump higher in export demand. Our export program has been excellent so far this year, and that's really just trade partners all around the world dealing with declining corn stocks. And we saw that confirmed at the global level in Tuesday's report rather. So that was constructive to continue to see our global corn carryout get a little bit tighter, but domestically a little disappointed we didn't see the export number tick higher. Now, if you look a little further into some of those global numbers, what we've seen really since last summer is the USDA has pulled the Chinese corn import number down considerably. We started the year last summer, 23 million metric tons was their estimate. They trimmed another 2 million tons off of this month's estimate. We're down to 8 million metric tons for an import estimate for the Chinese. Why does that matter? They haven't bought any corn from the U.S. this year. That's not really a big deal. The problem is they buy a lot of corn from Brazil. That started 2 years ago when they got their phytosanitary agreements in place with the Brazilians. So it could create more export headwinds for the United States as we get into late summer, as that Brazilian safrinha crop comes off. So we'll have to watch that. If China's not actively taking corn, it allows Brazilian corn to make its way into some of those export channels that we would be a primary supplier of.
Well, Luke, speaking of exports and challenges, we've had a lot of tariff news over the past 2 weeks. And as you and I, as I mentioned, visit here midweek, who knows, the whole situation could be different. But as you look at all of the news of tariffs on and off, we've got Canada, Mexico, the EU, and China all involved in various tariff disputes, I guess is what I'll call them, with President Donald Trump. What matters most for producers today?
Yeah, agriculture gets caught in the crosshairs as we start dealing with broader tariff issues. A lot of this is stemming from steel and aluminum imports, and those being tariffed from Chinese suppliers, Canadian suppliers. A lot of those obviously key trade partners for us, Mexico and China being number 1 and 2 as it relates to that. So as we sit here Wednesday, we had a tough day in grains, we had a tough day in soybeans, and that was really with the EU responding to those steel and aluminum imports. Canada did the same. And so that headline risk, again, is going to pull money out. And when you've got a net positive investment, or where your managed money positions are net long in the corn market, they can continue to de-risk and pull money out of this market. So the tariffs are hard to stay on top of. We get different information every day. They're on again, off again. And so that uncertainty, again, is going to pull money out of our markets, and I think de-risk here for a time until we can find some more.
Good to have Luke join us here on Market Journal, get his take of everything impacting the grain markets right now. Now, next week on the show, Heather Ramsey will be stopping by. She, of course, with the ARC Group. We welcome your questions here on the show, so be sure to email those in, and I'll pass those right along to Heather. Adding cover crops to your operation takes some fine-tuning. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. But using what you already have, such as livestock and irrigation, and learning from experienced producers can make this whole process a bit easier, as well as more profitable. If you want to know more about what works best, 3 farmers recently shared their cover cropping strategies in the March issue of the Nebraska Farmer. Check your mailbox to read that edition. It is now time to check in with Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Eric Hunt for a look at weather. Eric, has been pretty nice this week, temperature-wise. Any chance we can keep that trend around as we turn to the week ahead?
Well, thanks, Bryce. Mother Nature's roller coaster ride continues, and we got a little bit of everything coming up here the next week. Starting at the beginning of the week, though, we're going to have ridging overhead. That's going to mean warm temperatures to start the week, particularly on Monday. Pretty good chance of getting highs well into the 70s, maybe even close to 80 degrees across portions of central Nebraska during the day on Monday. Slightly cooler across portions of the Panhandle. But it'll be sharply colder across portions of western and northern Nebraska on Tuesday as a strong cold front moves through the state. So if you live in the western and northern thirds of the state, expect temperatures on Tuesday to be significantly colder. And depending on how far southeast that front slides on Tuesday, it may be pretty warm at early afternoon and much colder by nightfall. Another storm system will be moving into the central United States as we head into Wednesday. Now, still a little bit uncertainties exactly how this is going to track. But right now, the consensus is that this storm will track just to the south. That's going to put most of Nebraska in a favorable position for picking up precipitation starting late Tuesday night throughout the day on Wednesday, maybe even early Thursday morning. Some of that will fall in the form of rain, some of it may fall in the form of snow, but in general, total precipitation amounts, I think the entire state has a pretty good chance of picking up at least 1/4 of an inch. And I think there's a reasonably good chance, if this verifies, that we could get 1/2 inch to 1 inch of rain or precipitation across the eastern third of the state. As I mentioned, there is going to be a chance this falls to snow. Now, with warm ground temperatures, it would not necessarily accumulate to the streets if it's falling during the day. But on grassy surfaces, there is a chance that we could get 3 to 6 inches of snow across portions of south central into east central and northeastern Nebraska as we head into Wednesday. It also is likely to be relatively windy from the north and northwest, so that would certainly prohibit or make travel a little bit difficult during the day on Wednesday if it is indeed snowing. Looking a little bit deeper, the crystal ball, the CPC shows what favored east and west of us, kind of no signal here for most of Nebraska, here in the Great Plains. But I am watching the potential for a shortwave to moving into this region as we head toward the 23rd and 24th. Depending on the track of that would give most of the state, at least especially the southern third of the state, a chance of additional precipitation as we head into the week after next. CPC favors warm temperatures being the rule across pretty much the entire state and the entire eastern two-thirds of the country, really, as we head into the latter part of March. And looking a little bit deeper in the crystal ball, the European model shows warm being favored across the Great Plains through most of the month of April, cooler to the east of us. I do think there's going to be a chance of getting at least 1 or 2 rounds of colder air as the end of the month, the first part of April. So I definitely think we're going to see temperatures drop below freezing periodically through the first week of April. And I definitely think there is a reasonably good chance that we start off the season a little bit cool here in the eastern side of the Corn Belt. Wet over here is favored in April, but drier across the western Corn Belt and most of the central Great Plains, including pretty much all of Nebraska for the month of April, according to the European model. Now, I don't think this means we're not going to have any precipitation, but right now the signal is definitely a little bit drier as we head toward the end of the month and into the first part of April. That's not necessarily good news. Now, we have seen soil moisture improve somewhat across the state in the last week with precipitation, but generally, most of this region, we are running well short of where we would like to be for soil moisture at this point in time. We did see some improvement on the drought monitor with the recent precipitation across the Sandhills, a little bit of degradation across the southeastern Panhandle. Soil temperatures have shot up into the 40s across the state with the recent warm temperatures, and precipitation roundup for the week ending March 8th, 2025. Back to you, Bryce.
All right, Eric, we appreciate that update. Well, let's go back, folks, to last week as we brought you this show from Commodity Classic, and it was during the show that we were starting to get lots of news on the tariff front. Of course, soybeans heavily impacted by tariffs, particularly with China. To that point, we had the chance to sit down with a representative from the U.S. Soybean Export Council to evaluate how soybeans would possibly be impacted by tariffs, but we began by looking back on some of the history of where soybeans have gone in terms of world trade. A lot of news on this front, but maybe we should start here by going back a little bit and talking about soybean exports in particular, of where we have been, historically speaking. Bring us up to speed.
Well, so, soybeans is an amazing crop, and it's demanded all over the world, and it's not grown as nearly as many places around the world as, say, wheat or corn. So we've been working in international markets for over 70 years at this point. We export about 60% of the production, so exports is a really critical part of establishing the price for U.S. soybean farmers.
Historically speaking, can you look back and see when exports of soybeans really took off?
Gosh, when you look back over the history, we've always had, because the U.S. was the number one supplier and the number one grower and number one exporter. And so if you look back, starting back in the 50s, honestly, we started to see exports going out of the United States, first to Japan, then into the European Union, and it's just kind of expanded from there to where now we're sending to over 80 countries around the world. So exports really started to take off, though, in the early 2000s when China came into the marketplace, because China accounts for over 60% of global trade in soy. So you can't really think about soybeans and soybean trade over the last couple of decades without talking about China and the important role that they play.
Okay, that's where we have been.
Yeah.
Where are we at today? I think the word uncertainty comes to mind, at least for me. Same for you?
Yes, uncertainty is certainly on everyone's mind. And I think that from a trade perspective, uncertainty is a bit of the evil. Trade likes certainty. So with some of the uncertainty in the marketplace right now, it certainly could have an impact on soybean exports. But what we're seeing is we continue to see strong demand from the global marketplace. Has there been a little bit over the last couple of weeks with some of the talks of tariffs or reciprocal tariffs? There's been a little bit of a backing off on the U.S. Just for that risk. However, this is also the time when we start to see our exports slow down because the Brazilian crop is coming off, and so this tends to be a little bit of a tapering down of our season. We continue to remain consistent now through the rest of the year, but this is a time when we would start to see our sales go down anyway. But it's certainly, we are hearing from the international marketplace some concern about the uncertainty of what might happen as it results to tariffs.
Did you say earlier that China accounted for 60% of the soy exports from the U.S.? Did I hear you correctly?
China accounts for 60% of global trade.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
it's a little less than 40% from the U.S. Of our exports. And so part of that is, during 2018 to 2020, there was a trade war, and that really pressed China to do some diversification. But at the same time, we were really looking to diversify because it's just like your stock portfolio. You don't want too much in one basket. And we had become very heavily reliant on China. And certainly we still great customer. We want to supply China. There is still growth going on there, but we've been able to diversify our markets a little bit so that China is about 40% of our exports now, instead of at one time it was close to 60% of our exports.
Tell me more about those efforts made during the first Trump administration. Where are some of those new markets that were developed?
So we had an opportunity during that time because we became more price competitive, and we had an opportunity to go into places we had never been before. So that presents opportunity, but it also presents some challenges. So we were sending soybeans to places that the U.S. had never sent. We needed to work on some phytosanitary issues, among other things. So that was something where the USEC team was on the front line of ensuring that there was the access to those markets. So we would get exporters or importers calling and saying, hey, we want to do this trade, but there's some sort of barrier in place. You know, we don't have a phytosanitary agreement, or there's a GM approval process that's not been fully done. So how can you guys help us? So we were very busy during that time of getting all that done. This time around, there are no tariffs in place. There's been no actual trade disruption. It's just a matter of anticipating that. But I think we also are looking at, the Trump administration is looking to try and make trade fairer. And so anytime we have an opportunity to identify some areas where we might have some pinch points and then work on those, then we're certainly wanting to do that too.
So we're going to the conversation, of course, where we're going here. None of us have a crystal ball to know what's going to happen in particular. News seems to change on the daily. How can our viewers, Nebraska farmers, best prepare for perhaps any market disruptions that may come down the pipeline?
So I think that, the farmers are incredibly resilient. I'm a farmer's daughter and very proud of that fact, but I know farmers are incredibly resilient. And so I think that we've got a good base. You also can rest assured that we wake up every day, and our mission, regardless of what's happening from a political environment, is to help maintain those relationships internationally so that we can, when the time is right, be able to take advantage of that. You know, it's a challenging time for everybody, but as things start to stabilize, I think we'll see some opportunities that come out of all of these challenges. And it's just be patient for the moment. Know that we continue to wake up every day promoting your products around the world, and we're going to continue to do that regardless of what's happening in Washington, D.C.
Good update there with Rosalind for the U.S. Soybean Export Council. Want to let you know that on next week's show, we'll be talking more about tariffs and the potential impact for the U.S. agriculture sector back here in Nebraska with the team from the Yider Institute. You won't want to miss that as part of next week's edition of Market Journal. Well, that is going to wrap up this week's show. We will let you know that if you did miss one of our stories, don't you worry. You can catch up with all of our stories by visiting our YouTube as well as our social media accounts. We hope to see you back here next time. But until then, I'm Brian Stuskit, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.